promised us in this very hall that they were ready for this election, and that really brought a lot of happiness to all of us. But life happens. Life happens like it happened on the 23rd, that what they promised us did not come to pass. Obviously, you noticed the uneasiness, the discomfort that brought along. Our responsibility as observers is simply to observe as to what kind of impact is that kind of situation going to have on the outcome of this election. And I think that's why we have been observing. And the rest of the concerns, we have raised them in our reports, and we have addressed the issues of ZEC directly in all of our reports. So I think that ZEC, it remains for them to assess what we have said, and the Zimbabwean people to make up their minds based on what we observed and what we think about the failure of ZEC to live up to their promise.
Welcome viewers to another episode of the Statesman Podcast. Alright, so let me start making my case today by asking a question. How does a political party in power for over 4 decades continue to win elections amidst economic collapse and widespread discontent? People have no jobs, there is no electricity, adequate electricity to power manufacturing, even for home use. Nothing really seems to be working in Zimbabwe. There's no power even for agriculture. The economy is at a standstill or even in a regression. But here we have a political party which has been in power amidst all the economic collapse and widespread discontent. Is it because of popular will, or is it a carefully engineered political system? So in this episode today, we are going to make a case that it is a carefully engineered political system, and the key lies with the supposed referee of the elections, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, known as ZEC. So first, we would quickly trace the history of contested elections in Zimbabwe leading to the creation of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Then we will describe or state the 5 key mechanisms that ZEC uses to facilitate electoral capture on behalf of the ruling party, Zanu-Pf. So, in the year 2000, there was a proposed constitution which was designed to entrench and expand the presidential powers, and crucially included a clause allowing for the uncompensated seizure of white-owned farms. So the stunning defeat of this government-sponsored constitutional referendum in Zimbabwe in February 2000, it proved to be a watershed moment for Zimbabwe's ruling Zanu-Pf party. The unprecedented rejection at the poll triggered a strategic and systemic effort to seize control of the nation's electoral machinery, and that ensured that such a political setback would not be repeated again. In other words, is to say Zanu-Pf would never go into an election where it does not have the confidence of the outcome. So the defeat of this referendum by a margin of 54.7% to 45.3% was Zanu-Pf's first significant national defeat ever since independence of 1980. The result signaled the rise of the newly formed Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, which had successfully managed to galvanize a powerful no-vote campaign alongside civic society groups. So first, with the real possibility of losing power, was, if anything, this was a highlight of what the future of elections for Zanu-Pf looked like. So the reaction Zanu-Pf did was swift and multifaceted, leading directly to the capture of the electoral processes. Zanu-Pf blamed its defeat on the white minority, and what it then did was to unleash a wave of violent farm invasions led by war veterans. We all know war veterans. They are a very problematic group of people in the country, in the political sector in Zimbabwe. So their campaign was very violent, and they really did manage to take quite a lot, the majority of the farms, except probably of the white people who were protected by some very powerful Zanu-Pf individuals. I know there is a farmer who was protected by the current president of Zimbabwe. If information that I have is anything to go by, up to now they are still owning that farm in Kwekwe. So this campaign of intimidation, it served a dual purpose. It fulfilled the land siege agenda, which had been rejected in the referendum, and it also created a climate of fear ahead of the June 2000 parliamentary elections. So critically, the government began then to undermine the existing electoral bodies. At the time, elections were managed by a tripartite system. Firstly, there was the Electoral Supervisory Commission, ESC. This is a board which would be appointed by the president to supervise elections. And then secondly, there was the Election Directorate, a board which managed the logistics of the elections. And then thirdly, the all-powerful Registrar General's Office, which was a government department under the Ministry of Home Affairs. It was responsible for crucial tasks of voter registration and compiling the voters' roll. Now, so following the referendum, the Electoral Supervisory Commission, which had some semblance of independence, to be fair, it found itself sidelined because it couldn't play the political game. Its chairman at the time was Bishop Attendi. He resigned in frustration, complaining that the powerful and partisan Registrar General, who was Toba Mdede, was making unilateral decisions and leaving the ESC out of the electoral process. Now, further to that, the government also used presidential decrees to change electoral laws without consulting the Electoral Supervisory Commission, and effectively this stripped the supervisory authority of its power and enhancing the power of the Registrar General's Office on the other hand. And the Registrar General's Office was an office it was an entity that was controlled by Zanu-Pf. So after that, Zimbabwe now was ready for Zanu-Pf was ready for the 2002 presidential election. So the Zimbabwean, the presidential election was not just a flawed poll, it was a brazen, real-time demonstration of how the state's electoral machinery had been comprehensively captured, compromised by the ruling Zanu-Pf party. Morgan Tsvangirai, the president of the Movement for Democratic Change, who officially lost to Mugabe, described the outcome as a daylight robbery. His sentiments was echoed by numerous independent voters by numerous independent observers, not voters, who witnessed the subversion of the democratic process. So here is how the 2002 election exposed the capture of the electoral process. Firstly, the partisan conduct of key electoral institutions. So the office of the Registrar General held by Toba Mdede was central in the manipulation. This office had sole control over the chaotic and flawed voters' roll. It was accused of removing suspected opposition supporters, adding ghost voters, and creating a supplementary roll that was not open to public inspection. The Electoral Supervisory Commission, the official oversight board, was rendered powerless. Its recommendations were ignored and its authority was completely overshadowed by the Registrar Generals and other state actors. In a move that stunned observers, 72 senior army officers were seconded to the ESC, and this effectively militarized the Electoral Supervisory Commission, the administration of that commission, So no wonder why Zanu-Pf MPs even today are pushing for establishment of a national school of ideology. The motion has been tabled in Parliament and it is being debated. The idea generally is not really to have people that are patriotic, but it is to have people that are brainwashed, people that don't question authority, people that can just let the status quo do as they wish. In one of my conversations with a very senior Zanu-Pf a leader, he said to me one day, the main reason why we are really hoping that we can have a patriotic country is because the more a person becomes patriotic, the more they align themselves to Zanu-Pf. So, which is really why you can see even today we have parliamentarians from the Zanu-Pf bench pushing a lot and vehemently on the patriotic bill, which doesn't even make sense in my own opinion. So the other issue was systematic voter disenfranchisement. So there was a deliberate and drastic reduction in the number of polling stations in urban areas, which were opposition strongholds. Now, conversely, if you compare that to the rural areas, which are Zanu-Pf's heartlands, they had a surplus of polling stations with little to no waiting time. Munhu kungosvika otopinda mu-voting booth otovhotera Zanu-Pf otobuda oenda kumba, because Zanu-Pf has a stranglehold on the village or the village voters for reasons that we can explain in another episode. But that's what happened in urban areas where the majority of the voters, they are sympathetic, were sympathetic, and even up to today are sympathetic to the opposition political parties. It would be very much difficult. The environment, the conditions that they would engender there, they would be very much difficult for them to just arrive at the voting booth, at the polling station, and then cast your vote and then leave. It will be very difficult. But in comparison to the villages where majority of the people are sympathetic to Zanu-Pf, people just come, little to no waiting time, because there are a lot of polling stations that would have been set up there, unlike in the urban areas. So, adding to that damning verdict of observers from what they observed in the 2002 elections, so there was a stark difference between the reports of independent observers and those friendly to Zanu-Pf. This highlighted, I can say, the scale of the manipulation, where you have those independent observers friendly to Zanu-Pf. They would say the election was free, fair and credible, but then you would have international observers. They would come then with damning verdicts to say, no, this election really was riddled with a lot of issues that are supposed to be absent from a free, fair and credible election. Right, so you had the Commonwealth and Western observers who condemned the 2002 election. They declared the election was conducted in a climate of fear and concluded that the conditions in Zimbabwe did not adequately allow for a free expression of the will of the people. The Narration Observer Mission back then and domestic groups like the Zimbabwe Election Support Network, the ZESNI, reached similar scathing conclusions also. Zimbabwe was subsequently suspended from the Commonwealth in the same year, 2002. And also the 2002 election was the culmination of Zanu-Pf's post-2000 strategy. And the strategy can be summarized or can be captured by this phrase, electoral capture. That became the strategy of Zanu-Pf from that point onwards. Right, then let's talk about the 2008 general election, which is an ultimate case study for everything wrong in the Zimbabwean electoral landscape. So the 2008 elections in Zimbabwe stand as a stark and definitive example of Zimbabwe Electoral Commission's complicity in the capture of electoral processes. The events that unfolded between the first round of voting on March 29 and the sham presidential runoff on June 27 demonstrated that ZEC was not a neutral arbiter, but a critical tool used by the Zanu-Pf regime to subvert the will of the people and retain power against all odds. The complicity of ZEC was exposed through the deliberate withholding of results, its silence and inaction during a campaign of terror that followed prior to the runoff, and its presiding over an illegitimate single candidate runoff. So this is how ZEC exposed how captured it is during the 2008 elections. Firstly, there was a 5-week delay, which I can say it was withholding the people's verdict, the result of the election. So this is the first and most glaring piece of evidence of ZEC's complicity. This unprecedented failure to announce the results of the March 29 presidential election for over 5 weeks. And during this period, independent tallies showed a clear loss for Robert Mugabe. Zanu-Pf was in disarray. There are reports which indicated at the time that Zanu-Pf's Politburo was in a real state of crisis. It had been shocked by the scale of their defeat, and it was debating how to proceed. It was the military junta, reportedly, that advised Robert Mugabe against conceding defeat. And we have heard a number of stories today about the people that were involved in subverting the will of the people. The current president of Zimbabwe right now, Emmerson Mnangagwa, he was involved. We have heard of Didmas Mutasa. We have heard of Constantino Chiwenga. Remember, in 2017, where there are reports that before they engineered the coup, he was fired by Robert Mugabe. But one of the reasons that he gave Robert Mugabe why he was not going to leave his office as long as Mugabe was there was because in 2008, when Robert Mugabe had been defeated by Morgan Tsvangirai, it was Chiwenga and Emmerson Mnangagwa who said that cannot happen, and those are the people that were responsible for bringing power back again to Robert Mugabe, to deliver the power to Zanu-Pf again. So these are the people today that are at the epitome of the Zimbabwean government. The other one is a president, the other one is a deputy president. Well, you know what happened with Mutasa. He aligned with the wrong group. The Gamma talks of Joyce Mjuru, they are way out of power. Right, so the part was in disarray. It could only take capture of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to deliver power to Zanu-Pf. And also the other thing was ZEC became a black box during this period. So instead of releasing the results as they were verified, which is normally what should be done, ZEC went silent. It ignored court applications from the opposition, which demanded the release of the results, and instead it announced a recount in 23 constituencies. And this move was widely seen as a delaying tactic to buy time and potentially manipulate the figures. So when ZEC finally announced the figures on May 2, it claimed that Tsvangirai had won with 47.9% of the vote to Robert Mugabe's 43.2%. And this conveniently triggered a constitutionally mandated runoff. Now, on top of the 5-week delay, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission was also complicit through silence following Operation Makafutira Papi. So the period between the announcement of the runoff and the scheduled vote on June 27 was a campaign of retribution and terror. The state unleashed a coordinated wave of violence against the population of Zimbabwe. This operation was led by war veterans. Again, the same people that led a violent siege of farms are the same people again who led this operation again. So Geza today coming out and protesting against the leadership of Emmerson Mnangagwa, of Zanu-Pf and all that, as a war veteran and on behalf of war veterans. But honestly, war veterans have been at the center of what is wrong in Zimbabwe today. Even the economic impact that their claim of their monetary claims that they were given in 1997, I think 1997 and 98, the 50,000 lump sums that they got from the government, that they managed to actually to force out from the government. So the war veterans have been very central to a lot of the problems that Zimbabwe has been facing today. So in 2008, they led this promotion, they led this operation Makafudra Papi, and in doing so, they were supported by Zanu-Pf youth militia, which also point back to that school of ideology, and youth people, they can easily be manipulated and used by Zanu-Pf, and also state security agents also were involved. So it systematically targeted opposition officials, activists, and ordinary citizens in areas that had voted for the MDC. And in their verdict, human rights organizations documented that there was a murder of over 200 opposition supporters. There was torture and beating of tens of thousands of people, and then there was also a displacement of over 200,000 individuals as their homes were burnt. So throughout this horrific campaign, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, what did it do? It remained silent. The inaction of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission was a dereliction of duty that amounted to direct complicity. It gave a green light to Zanu-Pf's campaign of terror and allowed the electoral environment to be fundamentally poisoned. In international law, silence is viewed as acquiescence. If others states are voting on a law or on a decision and you are absent or you don't vote, you stay out, you are considered as to have voted because your silence is treated as acquiescence. You are in agreement. Right, so let's move to the 2023 Zimbabwe election, which is the freshest election, which I would like to characterize as the culmination of refined capture tactics by Zanu-Pf. So the 2023 general election in Zimbabwe marked more than just a political contest. It stood as the combination of the decades of carefully honed state capture tactics or electoral capture tactics specifically. So what began with crude overt manipulation in the early 2000s evolved into a sophisticated system of electoral control, blending legal manipulation, institutional dominance, media censorship, and strategic violence. There was even international backlash of the 2023 elections. SADC, like the video that you that you saw at the beginning of the video, they issued one of its most critical preliminary reports ever, highlighting the election's failure to meet regional democratic standards. So the EU also and the Commonwealth, they noted grave concerns over the integrity of the process. The Carter Center and local watchdogs like the Zimbabwe Election Support Network and ERC, they exposed deep-rooted irregularities from the opaque result transmission to targeted voter suppression. So this was not just another disputed Zimbabwean election, it was the final form of electoral capture, sleek on the surface, yet deeply rigged underneath. A textbook case of how authoritarian regimes can simulate democracy while stripping it of substance, showing the form, having the form but without the substance. Now, this leads us to what I like to say are the 5 pillars of ZEC capture. How does ZEC capture the elections? How do they do it? What are the strategies? What are the techniques that they employ? So I have characterized this into 5 pillars, which I'm going to go through quickly. So the pillar number 1 is capture by personnel, the Securocrat Commission. So the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, it serves as a commission. It has a lot of personnel who came from the military, the Central Intelligence Organization, who are manning a lot of the posts there, especially the Secretariat. And then pillar number 2, you have got the voters' roll. And the voters' roll is the foundation of fraud. The voters' roll is the single most important pre-election tool. So ZEC failed to provide a searchable, analyzable electronic copy to the opposition in time. Now, So the presence of ghost voters who are deceased or people that have migrated, duplicated entries and suspicious removals or movements of voters, particularly in urban opposition strongholds. Then we go to plan number 3, which is delimitation, gerrymandering power. So ZEC, what it does, it uses, like any other commission or election administrator who rigs elections, gerrymandering is one of the most common used techniques to do this. It did not start in Zimbabwe. It originated even in Europe. I think the early cases of gerrymandering, even the word gerrymandering, came from the United States of America. So what they do, the commissions, and in our case, they use this to pick and crack votes. So picking opposition votes into a few super constituencies, especially in the urban areas where the opposition always wins. You can't put many constituencies there if you are rigging the elections. And so what they do, they pick super constituencies for the opposition, and then they crack the rest across multiple rural constituencies where Zanu-Pf has more control, and this dilutes the opposition vote. So where the opposition wins one constituency in a city, 2-3 constituencies in a city, for example in Masvingo, where the opposition can win one seat in Masvingo City, and then as a province in Masvingo, I think it is 25 constituencies, and so the opposition will just win one constituency in the city, and then goes on to lose 24 more constituencies in the rest of the province, which is actually rural constituencies. So that's how gerrymandering works. So generally that's how it works. So we go to plan number 4, which is election day logistics, which we can describe, especially in the previous election of 2023, as suppression by delay, voter suppression by delay. And vakamirira ballot papers hangauye. They took time, like what we had in the originating video when the episode started. A lot of people waited in the town, especially in Harare. People waited, and those are opposition strongholds, but the voting materials were just not there. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission made sure there was nothing there. People would wait, and those who can't wait, definitely we have to leave without voting. And what does that do? It works in favor of the ruling party, Zanu-Pf. So the deliberate delay in delivering ballot papers specifically to opposition strongholds, it disenfranchises voters who can't wait all day, and it creates also an atmosphere of confusion and distrust, in contrast to the smooth process in rural Zanu-Pf strongholds. Then plan number 5, the last one, is results management, the opaque black box. So ZEC fails to follow a transparent results collection path. The national result is often announced without ZEC providing a clear, verifiable breakdown of how they reached the final number from the 23,000 plus V11s. So the lack of this transparency makes it impossible to audit the final result, forcing the opposition to go to a captured judiciary with incomplete evidence. But as we realized in 2023 election, the opposition did not even bother to go to court to challenge the result. They only went there when there was an assault on their parliamentary membership by one Sengezo Chavangu. We did an episode on Chavangu. You can check on the list of our episodes, you will find it. You should be able to listen to it, and it's an exciting and eye-opening episode. Right, so the consequences of all this, after we have done all this, you'll discover that the country suffers now from illegitimate crisis. A government that lacks domestic and international legitimacy. International legitimacy, they have it. The international community, they would always prefer peace. So if recognizing a government gives them peace, then that's what they would go for. But domestically, there is a problem. So the government has even problems with people don't have the confidence of the government. So even if the government comes and say, okay, this is the new currency that we are going to be using, it's called ZIG. Now people don't have the confidence of the government because they don't recognize the government. They don't believe that they voted the government into power. So the other issue is economic stagnation. And then in the case of Zimbabwe, it's more of economic regression. Things are just getting worse. They never really get better at all. So there is so political instability and disputed elections deter investors, and they prevent actually access to international finance. So it's very important that Zimbabwe, it needs to make sure that they have free, fair and credible election which are devoid of rigging. So the other thing is erosion of democracy. So when people continue to go and vote, and then the result is somehow viewed as rigged, and there's actually evidence to back those claims, what happens is when you have elections next time, the people who experienced who saw the rigging last time, and those people probably, most likely, if they are opposition supporters, next time they will have what is called voter apathy, because they lose faith in the system to say, even if you go and vote, the election will be rigged, so it won't make any difference, so why bother voting? That would be the sentiment. So that leads now to erosion of democracy, and a free, fair, credible election is a cornerstone of an effective democracy. So when we look at the Zimbabwe's elections, it's not just what happens on polling day. It's a meticulously constructed system from a compromised commission staff and a manipulated voters roll to gerrymandered boundaries and opaque results management. So ZEC acts less like a referee and more like a key player on the Zanu-Pf's team. And this isn't just a political issue, it's the root cause of the country's ongoing governance and economic crisis. So let me know what your thoughts on ZEC's role are. Are there other mechanisms of capture I missed? Let me know in the comments below. If you find this analysis valuable, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives. Please share this video to help raise awareness of the challenges facing democracy in Zimbabwe. Until next time, take care.